Hi, I'm Christy. Welcome to Weird and Witchy Shit, a place for, well, weird and witchy shit. Here we talk about everything from the magic of yoga, rituals, tarot, crystals, astrology, self-love, mental health, spiritual stuff, spooky things, and anything of the mystical variety. So if that sounds like the kind of shit you're into, then you're in the right place, my friend. Welcome to the coven. Today we are talking about one of Scotland's biggest historical mysteries, and that is the mystery of the fairy coffins, the mini coffins, the little coffins, the Lilliputian coffins. And these tiny little coffins are something that I mentioned very briefly in my deep dive of my Burke and Hare video, because as we'll get into in this, there is some links to the victims of Burke and Hare. Burke and Hare were two notorious murderers who sold the bodies of their victims to anatomists in Edinburgh in the 1820s. If you want to see a full video on that, I will leave the link here. And if you're listening to the audio, you'll be like, here where bitch, it'll be on YouTube. So let's go back to actually finding the fairy coffins. So we'll travel back to 1836 in Edinburgh at Arthur's Seat. So Arthur's Seat is basically a huge hill in Edinburgh that is actually an ancient volcano, but it's now a very popular walk and tourist attraction. In mythology, Arthur's Seat is known as one of the potential locations of where Camelot was, and Camelot is of course the castle that is linked to King Arthur. This is absolutely nothing to do with the mini coffins, but you know me, I just like a little bit of mythology. So in late June, early July of 1836, a group of boys were walking up Arthur's Seat looking for rabbits to hunt. They were off in one of the more secluded parts of Arthur's Seat, and they noticed that there was an area covered by some thin sheets of slate. So they decided to go and remove these sheets of slate and see what was inside. So they moved it to reveal, which is sometimes described as a cave, but I think more likely it's just like a little nook or a little like cleft in the rocks. And in this little cleft in the rocks, there was 17 tiny little coffins. These mini coffins were only about 3 or 4 inches long, and not only that, but inside every little coffin was a tiny little handmade wooden figure of a person, and each tiny figure was dressed in different clothes from each other. The way the coffins were laid was 8 in the bottom row, 8 in the middle row, and then one single coffin on top, as if a new row was potentially about to be started. It appeared that these coffins hadn't been put there all at the one time, but individually and perhaps over the course of a few years. So the bottom row of coffins, which we can assume was put there first, they were much more tatty and worn, decayed and decomposed. Like even like the clothes and stuff the little figures were wearing were a lot more gone than like the upper layers, whereas the middle layer was like a little bit decomposed but not as much as the bottom layer, and then the top little coffin looked almost as if it was brand new. And a description used by the Scotsman newspaper goes as follows: a miniature figure of the human form cut out in wood, the faces in particular being pretty well executed. They were dressed from head to foot in cotton clothes and decently laid out with a mimic representation of all the funeral trappings which usually form the last habiliments of the dead. The coffins are about 3 or 4 inches in length, regularly shaped and cut out from a single piece of wood, with the exception of the lids, which are nailed down with wire sprigs or common brass pins. The lids and slides of each are profusely studded with ornaments formed with small pieces of tin and inserted into the wood with great care and regularity. So the very exact location that these were actually found is a little bit unknown. We do just know that it was on Arthur's seat somewhere, but I mean, this is of course almost 200 years ago, so the facts can be a little bit blurry here and there. And there are some contradictory reports. For instance, some reports say the boys found a cave, some say it was a little cleft in the rock, some say it was covered by thin sheets of slate that could just be easily moved, and some of these sheets of slate were even shaped like little gravestones. And some people say that the cave/cleft actually had to be prized open with tools that the boys had been carrying. So honestly, not much else is really known about these coffins. It's just like a lot of speculation, really. But what we do know is that out of the 17 coffins found, only 8 are still around today, and they were potentially destroyed by the boys who found them. Again, according to the Scotsman newspaper, a number were destroyed by the boys, pelting them at each other as unmeaning and contemptible trifles. Some reports say that the boys took the coffins the next day to their schoolmaster, Mr. Ferguson. He was a member of the local archaeological society, and when he brought the little coffins to him, all the coffins were sealed, and he took them home later that night and opened the coffins up to reveal that they had the tiny little people inside them. I guess this does make sense because the remaining 8 coffins ended up in the possession of a jeweller by the name of Robert Fraser, who put them in his own private museum. The boys, of course, could have took these coffins straight to this jeweller, but I don't know, I guess it would just make more sense for young boys if they were like, oh, what adult will I give this to? We'll give it to Mr. Ferguson, he's into that kind of shit. And then once he'd had a look at them, he was like, okay, I'm going to either pass these on to this other guy or sell them on to this guy. So when Robert Fraser retired in 1845, the coffins were auctioned off for £4, and no one really knows what had happened to the coffins during this time period until 1901, when the coffins were donated to the National Museum of Scotland, where they are still today in Edinburgh. So if you wish to go and view them, then you can. If you are interested in what historians actually have to say about these coffins and you want to do your own research, I will leave links to all my sources down below in the description. But here are some of the very basic facts to know according to the National Museums of Scotland's website. The figures all appear to be made by the same hand, although it's possible the coffins were crafted by 2 different people. Some of the materials and tools used: wood, iron embellishments, nails, a sharp hooked knife, indicate the coffins could have been fashioned by a shoemaker. The figures seem to form a set, and their upright bearing, flat feet and swinging arms suggests that they may have been toy soldiers. Their eyes are open, making it unlikely that they were originally designed as corpses. Some of the figures are missing their arms, perhaps removed so that they would fit inside the coffin. The fabric the little bodies are dressed in dates from the early 1830s, so they hadn't lain buried for more than 6 years. And you know me, I do love the facts, but what do I love more than the facts? It's the theories, it's the conspiracies, so that's really what we are getting into today. So obviously these coffins did raise some questions of what the fuck? I mean, hearing this now in this day and age, I'm like, what the fuck? So I just can't imagine what people were thinking at this time, what these little coffins must mean. And over the years, there has, of course, been much speculation on what they actually do mean, all the way from surrogate burials to voodoo and witchcraft. So, as I mentioned before, a very popular theory is that these coffins are linked to the murders of Burke and Hare. This theory is popular because Burke and Hare had 16 victims who they murdered and sold their bodies, plus they did sell a body of one other man who had died of natural causes. But this would, in total, mean 17 of their victims didn't get a proper burial because their bodies were sold to anatomists, and a lot of people think that could be what these 17 coffins represent. Like a surrogate burial for these people to lay their souls to rest because they weren't given that opportunity. And this could be linked to religious beliefs, which is still, in a lot of cultures, it's still believed that like there should be proper rituals and proper burials and a proper funeral, and that is what kind of helps you move along into the afterlife. But if a body wasn't always present, sometimes these surrogate burials would maybe be performed. And some people actually think that this could represent the 16 murder victims of Burke and Hare, plus Burke himself, who was sentenced to death for the pair's crimes, while Hare testified against him for his immunity. And, you know, these times could match up. Burke and Hare were arrested in 1828, and these coffins were found in 1836, so not a huge gap in time, so it could be quite likely. And these murders in this case was, at the time, and even still is now, all these years later, big news. So it's not like out of the realm of possibility to think that these poor victims had been on somebody's mind and they decided to perform this surrogate burial so that the bodies could move on in the afterlife. I also had the thought, this isn't a theory that I read or anything, this is just one that like I came up with, but what if it wasn't someone who had heard about the crimes of Burke and Hare and was like doing these surrogate burials for them, but what if it was actually Burke, Hare, Helen or Margaret that had done these little coffins, and they actually did feel guilty for their crimes and they wanted to do these surrogate burials as a way to kind of free the souls of their victims and maybe lessen their own guilt a little bit. I wondered if this could have been done like after each victim, like made the coffin, made the doll, put it up there after every single one. But then I googled it in Tanner's Close, where Burke and Hare lived, and Arthur's Seat is about over a 2-hour walk away from each other, so that's probably unlikely, because if you did watch the Burke and Hare video, they were kind of rapid fire killing these people over the course of about 10 months. They had 17 victims, so that's quite a long walk to be doing 17 times in 10 months. So I don't think that's the case. So that was kind of like my first thought process with it, that maybe it was one of them and they were doing that as they went and like killed their victims. But I'm scrapping that because I don't think that's actually the case. But what if after they were all caught, Hare, Helen and Margaret, who Helen and Margaret were the wives of Burke and Hare, they all walked free while Burke was killed for his crimes? What if they actually felt really guilty? What if they felt some remorse, not only for their victims that they had like murdered or aided in the murder of or hid the murder of, but they also felt really guilty for betraying Burke in this way, who was either their friend or their husband. So they kind of wanted to like clear their own conscience by doing this and maybe, I don't know, get some good karma, I guess, for helping the souls move on or something like that. So that would kind of explain as well why there was like the 8 coffins on the bottom, then the 8 coffins on top of that, and then the 1 single coffin on top. Maybe it wasn't actually starting a new row of coffins. Maybe that was like the final coffin, the death that ended it all, the death of Burke. This could also mean that if this was a symbolic burial, whether it's related to Burke and Hare or not, and then when the boys found and destroyed the coffins, it destroyed that surrogate burial, which obviously meant a lot to someone, or they wouldn't have done that. So that is like a real shame when you think about it from that point of view. The only part of the Burke and Hare theory that makes me question it is the fact that all of the little figures seemed to be dressed in men's clothes, while most of Burke and Hare's victims were actually women. I think out of the 16 that they killed, I think was 11 of them women or something like that. 11 or 12 of them were women, so like a significant amount would be dressed as women, if you can assume that the reason that all these little people are all in different clothes is because they're supposed to represent someone. Then if they were going to take the time to make them to do this, they would make them look as close to the person it was supposed to be as possible. And obviously in this time period, men and women did dress drastically differently, so one could assume that if this was to represent a woman, then it would be in a little dress or something. This is a popular theory, and for me it makes a lot of sense with the time period, the reason for them being created, and even the location, but the outfit thing does kind of throw me a little bit. One very similar theory is that of an honorary burial, but nothing to do with Burke and Hare, but maybe for someone's loved one who had died in a foreign land or couldn't be buried at home for any other reason. Again, this comes down to using an effigy of a person to bury them so that they can have the burial, and when the body's not available to do that with. In Saxony, Germany, this was actually a popular custom. So in 1876, the director of the Museum of Hamburg put forward his theory about the mysterious coffins based on German superstition. So sailors would often keep mandrake root inside little coffins as a good luck charm to help keep them safe at sea. So he believed that these little coffins were probably not a surrogate burial, but were probably good luck charms, and this was like a merchant's stock of good luck charms that the boys had came across. But there isn't actually any evidence of this superstitious custom being practiced in Scotland, so I'm not sure about this one. I do think this is entirely possible that this was a substitute burial, but 17 people is a lot of people to be doing this for, and the Burke and Hare situation made sense because 17 people dying in a very close space of time who wouldn't have had proper burials. But I'm not too sure. Maybe it was something to do with like a ship of sailors. Maybe like a ship got lost at sea and someone took it upon themselves to do these surrogate burials for them. It's a possibility for sure. Witches and Satan. Of course, weird shit can't happen without witches and Satan getting the blame for it. So the Scotsman newspaper, again, first newspaper to report on these mini coffins, on July 16th, 1836, they reported, "Our own opinion would be, had we not some years ago abjured witchcraft and demonology, that there are still some of the weird sisters hovering about Mushat's cairn or the Windy Gible, who retain their ancient power to work the spells of death by entombing the likeness of those they wish to destroy. So poppet magic is a type of magic that involves using a little doll to represent someone as like a stand-in figure. So this would be used to kind of direct your spellcasting towards this figure, quite similar to voodoo. So this kind of poppet magic isn't actually always used for bad. It can be used for good as well. So you could maybe use like a figure to represent someone if you wanted to do a protection spell, a good luck spell, if you wanted to send them good health through magic. It's not all about like killing someone, but I guess the fact that these little dolls are in coffins, that doesn't look great. Technically though, one could argue that an honorary burial on its own, where you're using a little doll to represent someone who you're burying, even if with good intentions, you could argue that this is also a form of poppet magic. Most of the witchcraft and satanic theories are normally that these are victims of a person performing black magic to get that person to die. However, may I put forward my own theory? Let me put my own 2 cents in here. What if this was witchcraft, but not in the dark kind of evil way that most of the theories kind of go? What if this was witchcraft by maybe a local witch, who maybe women who have been widowed, lost their husband, maybe their husbands died, maybe their husbands went away and never returned, and they're like assumed to be dead, so they actually couldn't like bury their body, like millions of different reasons. What if these women would then go to this local witch and she would then perform the surrogate burial for them? This would be like a ritualistic burial with magic, and maybe the women would go to a local witch because they would trust her more with something like this if she was a lot more knowledgeable with it, and maybe they just needed like a little bit of help. This is also a possibility, I feel. This kind witch was performing ritualistic burials for her clients in a lovely secluded little area on Arthur's Seat, where she thought that these little dolls in little coffins would never be found. This to me could make a lot of sense as to why they all had different clothes. They were all put there at different times, but the coffins all appeared to have been created by just 1 or 2 people. I'm sure there probably is flaws in my theory, and I'm not saying that I believe this one 100%, but I think it's just nice to put a theory out there that doesn't necessarily mean like witchcraft equals evil. And I will finish off with a weird theory, which out of them all is probably my least favourite theory. Save the worst till last, why the hell not? So in 1906, the Scotsman published another story about the mini coffins because a local woman told them that she believed that she knew something about them. She said that a man who she described as a daft man because he was mute and deaf. Daft man is her words, not mine. I think that's quite cruel, actually. He would occasionally come into her father's. His name was Mr. B. He would come into his shop and he would beg for coppers quite often. And one time that he went into his shop, he begged for a pencil and some paper, and her father gave it to him. And on this piece of paper, he drew 3 coffins. Next to one, he wrote 1837. The next one, he wrote 1838. And the next one, he wrote 1840. And what makes this particularly weird is that Mr. B's, one of his very close relatives, died in 1837. Then after that, his cousin died in 1838. And then after that, his brother died in 1840, all aligning with those dates. And after the death of Mr. B's brother, this daft man returned to glower at him and then was never again seen. So a lot of the theories go that he was the maker of the coffins and grew mad when the boys had found them and destroyed them, and for some reason blamed Mr. B for this. Unsure why. I don't know about this theory, it's not particularly one that compels me. So that is all I have for you today. Please, please, please tell me your theories, maybe one that I have mentioned or one that you come up with all on your own. I would love to hear from you. For me personally, I feel like the Burke and Hare theory is pretty high on the list, along with my own theory about the good witch and the surrogate burials, because you've got to back yourself. If you'd like to continue the conversation, you can get me on Instagram at kristys_coven. That's KRISTYS_coven. You can also find me on YouTube at Kristys Coven, where I post a lot of free yoga classes and shit like that. And I'd love to have you join, because it's not a coven if it's just me. And until next time, bye!